These are both microOLED VR headsets, but once you actually use them, they couldn't be more different. But wait, smaller is always better in VR, right? Turns out, it depends. So let's break down the wins, the compromises, and who the Pimax Crystal Super and the Bigscreen Beyond 2 actually make sense for depending on what you value the most. We'll get to comfort, visuals, and performance, but something important needs to be said first. Size is first and foremost a choice, not an engineering matter. Like any piece of tech, it starts with a simple question. What are we actually trying to build? If your goal is maximum field of view, size quickly becomes secondary, and if minimizing weight is the top priority, then compromises elsewhere are unavoidable. So when we're talking about the Pimax Crystal Super Micro OLED and the Bigscreen Beyond, they're not just different sizes, they're built around completely different philosophies. Let's talk comfort, because this is where the size difference hits you immediately. With the Crystal Super, you're very aware that you're wearing a headset. There's more weight, more inertia when you move your head, but it is well padded and balanced. The Beyond 2 takes the opposite approach. There's almost nothing on your face, which is incredible, but that also means less room to distribute pressure and dissipate heat. So comfort here isn't about which one is lighter on paper, it's about how that weight affects the actual experience. And once comfort is out of the way, size starts affecting something way more important: what you actually see. So let's talk about what these two approaches actually mean for the visuals. With the Crystal Super, the larger housing allows for bigger optics and a noticeably larger sweet spot. It's more forgiving, and you don't feel like you have to fight the headset to stay perfectly aligned. The Beyond 2 goes the opposite way. The lenses are much smaller and the drop in clarity towards the edges is more obvious, simply because everything is packed into a much tighter physical space. That difference in lens diameter and overall headset size also affects how sensitive each headset is to IPD, and as a result it impacts clarity, glare, and overall visual stability. On the Beyond 2 specifically, glare is much more noticeable, and with the custom facial interface, heat can get trapped, which can even lead to fogging. That's why some people came up with the term swamp eyes to describe what it can feel like sometimes. Size also plays directly into field of view and binocular overlap. When you have more physical room to work with, you can push FOV without sacrificing overlap as aggressively. And just to put real numbers on it, I'm getting about 116 by 92 degrees of FOV on the Crystal Super, with roughly 76% binocular overlap, and about 108 by 102 degrees with a 74% overlap on the Beyond 2. It's also worth noting that you can actually adjust the FOV and binocular overlap on the Crystal Super, while the Beyond 2 doesn't give you that flexibility. So while both headsets use micro OLED displays, what you actually see is shaped far more by the lens design. And lens design is heavily constrained by size. But visuals directly affect performance, and these two take very different approaches here as well. The Super is pushing nearly double the number of pixels compared to the Beyond 2, and that comes with both upsides and downsides. On one hand, the visual clarity is on another level, but you're not really getting the full experience without at least an RTX 4080 and ideally something like a 5080 or even a 5090. That said, even when you normalize things, either by lowering the Super's resolution or super sampling the Beyond 2 in Steam VR, the Crystal Super still comes out ahead in overall sharpness. The Beyond 2 by comparison is much easier to drive, but there are trade-offs here too. To run it at its full 2560 by 2560 per eye, you're locked at 75 Hz. You can push it to 90 Hz, but the resolution drops to 1920 by 1920 per eye and then gets upscaled back to 2560, which makes the image noticeably blurrier compared to the native 75 Hz mode. Bigscreen calls this a DisplayPort limitation, but in practice it feels much more like a thermal constraint. And this is another place where size quietly matters. Even with a 5090 and 200% super sampling on the Beyond 2, the lenses still limit how sharp it can look compared to the Super. So the question here isn't which one looks better in isolation. It's which trade-offs you're willing to accept based on your PC, your expectations, and your personal preference. But visuals are only half the experience, and audio is where some of the size trade-offs become even more obvious. With the Super, especially when paired with the DMAS headphones, the sound is excellent. There's no heat buildup since they're off here, and overall it's a really solid audio experience. I wish I could say the same about the microphone. It works, but it's not great, so I'll do a quick mic comparison in a minute. The Beyond 2's audio is, well, non-existent. You'll need to use your own headphones or pick up the optional audio strap, which I have here. It's more than decent, but it lacks bass and strong directionality. That said, I'm still glad I got it. It does the job. The microphone though is a completely different story. It's absolutely top-notch and easily rivals my studio mic, which is kind of wild considering how small this headset is. This is a test of the microphone on the Pimax Crystal Super Micro OLED Engine Edition, and as you can hear, the microphone is usable, but it's not gonna win any prizes. And this is what the microphone on the Bigscreen Beyond 2 sounds like, and I think the difference is pretty obvious because this is a top-notch microphone. Again, neither approach is wrong, but size dictates the feature set far beyond what's immediately obvious. One more area that should absolutely affect your decision is tracking. The Crystal Super uses inside-out tracking with its own controller, so it's an all-in-one setup. It's not flawless by any means, but it's convenient, flexible, and works well for most use cases. The Beyond 2, on the other hand, requires external base stations. You'll also need to buy index controllers, which adds to the cost, but it does deliver extremely precise and consistent tracking. And this isn't just about convenience versus accuracy, it completely changes your setup. I ended up needing 4 base stations plus index controllers just to make sure everything was properly tracked, from my racing cockpit to the rest of my room. Inside-out tracking favors flexibility and ease of use. External tracking favors precision and stability. Again, neither approach is wrong, but once more, size and design goals dictate how much tech can realistically be packed into the headset. At this point, it should be clear that these headsets don't just look different, they affect how you'll use VR on a day-to-day basis. The Crystal Super feels like a headset you plan around. It shines in seated experiences, sim racing, flight sims, and longer sessions where visual fidelity and immersion matter more. The Beyond 2, on the other hand, feels like something you can forget you're wearing. It's far better suited for long, casual sessions where comfort comes first, as long as you're willing to commit to a permanent tracking setup. This is where the expectations flip a bit. The bigger headset doesn't always feel more fatiguing, and the smaller one doesn't always feel more effortless. It depends entirely on how you're using them. So if you've been trying to decide which one is better in general, that's kind of the wrong question. The real question is, where do you actually want to spend most of your time in VR? So at this point, it might sound like the answer is pretty obvious. Bigger headset, better visuals, more flexibility. Smaller headset, better comfort, lighter, more modern. And if that's where you've landed, I wouldn't blame you. On paper, it makes sense. But here's the thing, living with these headsets long-term changes that conclusion pretty quickly. Because once the novelty wears off, the differences that matter most aren't necessarily the ones you notice on day one. After spending months with both, I don't think this comes down to which headset is better. The Crystal Super is the headset you choose when visuals come first, when you want maximum clarity with no real visual trade-offs, and you're willing to accept the size, weight, and hardware demands that come with that. The Beyond 2 is the headset you choose when comfort and minimalism matter more than anything else. When you want something that disappears on your face, even if that means committing to external tracking and accepting tighter optical constraints. Size doesn't just change how these headsets feel, it changes the optics, the performance, the audio, the tracking, and ultimately how you experience VR day to day. So yes, size does matter, just not in the way most people think. Personally, I'm just happy I'm lucky enough to own both and can't help but wish they had a baby. And that's kind of what the Pimax Dream Air is promising, the same displays and optical stack as the Crystal Super, but in a much smaller form factor. Fingers crossed they pull it off. I should be getting mine soon, so subscribe if you want to see my review of it. Hopefully this gave you enough real-world context to make a decision. I've got links to both headsets below if you want to support the channel, but no pressure either way. I've also got dedicated deep dive reviews of each headset if you want to go further. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Cheers, guys.